Hello, everyone, and welcome to Geek History Lesson Live. I am Jason on front of a blue starry background Inman.
I am Ashley Victoria Robinson, and welcome to your Mind University, because you have stumbled onto the live version of the podcast where we take one construct from popular culture and teach you everything you need to know about it in about an hour, except today, because we're in the middle of Summer Movie Club.
That's right, and we have a very special guest, the wonderful, the amazing lover of cores, member of the Legion of Shadows, and all-around nice guy, Henry Ducard / Mark Ellis is back on the show. Welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining us. I almost called you Henry.
Hey, you can call me whatever you want to, but you know that I might go by another name that goes back to ancient times. So this is my starting name for today. And not only, I assume when you said special guest, you were talking about that little sleeping Muppet behind me. But
oh, of course.
That's why I off-centered my seating position so everybody can see the real eye candy in my apartment anyway. And that's Molly the Wonder Dog. But yeah, I am, like I was telling y'all, next time, make me work a little bit because this is way too easy to talk about today.
Yeah, this is we'll just flat out say that today's episode is all about celebrating the 15th anniversary of Batman Begins. We're actually very close to even the premiere date of Batman Begins. We'll get into all of that in just a second but it's so funny because when we decided to do this summer movie series, we were like, oh, what are some of the movies we could do? And on one of the podcasts, I mentioned that I had a pretty special connection to this movie. And we threw it out as a hashtag Batman Begins, yes. And we very quickly got, I think, like 75.
We have like almost 100
yeah,
people.
100 people were like, you have to do this episode. So I'm so glad we had such a fun time with you, Mark, on the Gladiator episode. So I'm glad that we can pull you in and we can talk about Batman Begins. So let's go into the first section of our podcast, the 10-cent origin. Ashley, what is that?
The 10-cent origin is where we tell you all the basics, who's its and what's its galores, in case you ever go to a Christopher Nolan themed cocktail party and somebody says, what's up with that Batman Begins movie?
All right. So the release date in the United States for Batman Begins was, of course, June 15th in 2005. It was directed by Christopher Nolan. It has a screenplay by Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer with a story by David S. Goyer. That just means that David S. Goyer wrote the story doc. That's it. It had a budget of $150 million and a box office of $373.4 million, which is, I think, is very interesting because to nowadays, that would be considered a flop. Batman v Superman made like $900 million. So this is like small potatoes compared to modern day, which is very interesting. And of course, the synopsis of Batman Begins is Batman starts.
Yeah, it's pretty much there in the title.
It is in the title of the movie. And of course, there will be full spoilers for this film going forward. Let's talk about this. Really quickly, Mark, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. This is the only movie of this trilogy to use Batman in the title. Batman Begins, good title, bad title? What do you think?
I think it was a necessary title because you have to take everybody and pile them into the DeLorean or phone booth or whatever your time travel method of preference is and go back to that time when we were still, as a society, recovering from bat nipples and bat credit cards. And so this is such a smart title because it's telling the world, hey, we're not associated with Batman and Robin. This is a totally different, this is Batman beginning again. And it really gets a sucker like me involved because I love a superhero origin story. Like, I'm the last guy to get sick of, oh, it's Spider-Man and Uncle Ben again. Like, I love seeing how a person becomes super. And so with Batman Begins, Batman's always been one of my favorite superheroes, but I do have to admit something at the top of this show. And I feel shame, I feel guilt, and y'all can just X me out of this for the rest of the show if you want to. I did not see this movie in the theater. I did not go.
I technically did not either.
Okay, wait. Well, if we're gonna get into that,
we'll get to the full meet cutes there. I was trying to bring you up full screen, Mark, but I completely screwed up. It did not happen.
Trust me, the world does not need to see this any bigger than they already are.
Someone has it on a giant TV right now. You know that's true.
I'm certain. Okay, so let's go into the meet cute section of our podcast. Ashley, what is that?
That is the second part of the podcast, a term we stole from romantic comedy writing, where we tell you where we first met Batman Begins and how cute it was.
So, Mark, you started your story, so I want to hear this. You said, tell me, when was the first time you watched this movie? Tell me why you didn't see this movie in theaters. What was happening in 2005 with you?
Your excuse is going to be a lot better than mine, because I imagine your excuse has something to do with serving our country, and mine was utter laziness, because I lived right down the street at the time this came out from ArcLight in Hollywood, like literally right down on Cahuenga under the 101. It was a glorious apartment. It overlooked the Shell station. And
I know exactly that intersection.
Yeah, right. It's right across the street from that nice little crepe place. And I just never walked down to the theater. Now, this is back before Christian and I had started Schmoes, and I was getting into stand-up. I was doing stand-up every night now. And a lot of movies in the theater. And I think that there might have been a little bit of Batman fatigue still with me, just because it was so hard to get the taste of really the last two movies out of my mouth. And I was excited that this movie was happening. So I can at least say that I was pumped this movie was coming out, because it looked awesome. And I would read like box office results and all that stuff to see the movie was doing well for 2005. And I just never got my chubby buttocks down to ArcLight to see it. It's the first time that I saw this movie.
Yeah.
Netflix sent me a DVD, and I put it in, and I loved it. And it has been love ever since, to the point where I can still call it today my favorite comic book film of all time.
Nice.
That is great. Ashley, let's hear your story.
Okay, so I didn't see this movie in the theater. The first Batman movie I saw in the theater, the first live action was The Dark Knight.
Oh, okay.
This movie came out when I was in high school, and I had not seen. I'm very young. I'm
you kids. I could have seen this for a nickel.
And I had never seen any of the Batman movies that came out before this either, because I was either not alive or very small. And I had only heard that they were terrible. And so I was like, why do I want to go see another Batman movie if they all suck? And then I saw The Dark Knight because I loved Heath Ledger. And I went to I think it was called My Uncle's Basement. It was a local DVD rental place, and I bought a used copy of Batman Begins. So I saw it in 2008. After I'd seen The Dark Knight, I watched Batman Begins for the first time, and was still disappointed that Robin has not been in a live action Batman movie produced by Christopher Nolan. Jason, I know your meet cute. It's a very interesting story. We have some chats from way early saying that they can't wait to hear your story.
Yes.
Lay it on us.
Okay, so this movie for me was this film for me was the film of 2005. Now, I know a lot of people are like, Revenge of the Sith was 2005. And yeah, I was excited for that one. But this was the movie that I was excited for in 2005, because if we all remember that first teaser trailer of him like coming up the mountain, and you were like, what is this movie? And it finally seemed like it was going to be the first movie to take Batman seriously. Now, if you know some things of my life, you know that 2005 was the year I spent in Iraq. I was mobilized as part of the army and part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. So one of the downsides of that means you don't get to see movies in movie theaters.
I can't imagine why that would happen.
But fate aligned, and I had some chances to see this movie. Now, right around in June, because this movie came out in June 15th, 2005, in Iraq, there were these places called Haji Marts. Now, I know that's an offensive term. That's what they were called. Of course.
Named after the character
from Johnny Quest. Now, these were little bazaars, little shopping centers, literally made out of plywood on the side of the road, in villages right outside army bases that Iraqis would use to sell things to American soldiers. And one of the things they would always have would be illegal DVDs, okay? And they would even have DVDs of movies currently in cinemas. So the first time I ever saw Batman Begins, it was an illegal camcorder in a movie theater copy of a showing in France. it was so Batman Begins was in English, but all the subtitles were French. And now here's the thing, and I did not know this until much, much later. Apparently, whoever had recorded the copy that had made it to my illegal DVD, apparently they must have gotten caught, because I didn't know until much later that I was missing 30 minutes of this movie. So I watched this DVD. It was great. I loved it. I was like, oh my God, this is finally the Batman movie that I like, straight out of the comic books. I loved every minute of it. Now, flash forward about 3 months later to about September or October of 2005. Not exactly the certain time, but I got sent on a mission to do a convoy to Kuwait City. Now, the greatest thing about Kuwait City is that Kuwait City, not in Iraq, of course, not in a combat zone, so you can act a little bit more like a normal person there. So the greatest thing is there's a base down in Kuwait City called Camp Arifjan. It's still there. Some of my friends are serving there and stuff like that. And they have a tiny little movie theater. Now, what I say by this, it has a little like home theater thing that seats about 50 people with a decent sized screen. And when I was there in September, August, they were playing Batman Begins. And I was like, I've got to see this. Oh man, it's going to be my opportunity to see this. So I go there and I'm watching Batman Begins. And this will tell you the cut I had. So the scene in the movie where he suits up as Batman for the first time and he puts Falcone on the bat signal. On my illegal DVD version, you went from Falcone on top of the bat signal. It cut to Bruce waking up from the fear toxin. So the whole subplot of Scarecrow setting him on fire and doing the other stuff, and like, I had no idea that existed. I was just like, for me, for like 3 months, Batman Begins was only an hour and a half long.
Jeez.
So when it didn't cut right to Bruce waking up, I remember literally sitting there in my mind being like, I was like, oh my God, I get to see this movie again for the very first time. And I got to tell you, that may sound like really dumb, but for where I was and for how hard that year was for me, like that was like getting to see that movie for the first time again was like such a ray of light to me. And ever since then, this movie has like held a very special place in my heart. And every time the movie continues past Falcone, I'm always like, oh, whew, this is the good version.
You know, it's also another, it's like a real world example of why you should not pirate things. And why you should go to the official release.
I have so many questions. I'll try to limit it to just a couple. So do you still own the DVD that you bought as like memorabilia? I think the statute of limitations is up.
I don't, but I believe my parents do.
Very
I think it's still at my parents' house. Yeah.
Okay, so then follow-up question, which is so great for you because I know what a fan you are, is that you basically got to see your own version of the Snyder Cut.
Yeah.
Like 3 months later. Did you also, at that bazaar, happen to find Revenge of the Sith, a pirated copy of that?
Yes. Also, I will tell you, I also bought from that bazaar, by the way, I bought 2 giant little box sets of Star Trek The Next Generation. It was all 7 seasons of Star Trek Next Generation on 5 discs. That should tell you the DVD, the visual quality of these episodes. I bought all of The Simpsons on like 2 discs.
You do have a couple of those still.
I still have those. I still have the Iraqi Star Trek TNG, and then I bought all of Smallville. At that point, it was up to 5 seasons on like 2 discs.
Oh my! I won't send you on a wild goose chase through your house, but if you get a chance at some point and you find one of those, if you just want to send me a pic of it, I'm curious because I've been to the Middle East, obviously not in the same capacity as you, but I've been into that area a bunch of times, and so I know exactly the style of like that bazaar that you're kind of talking about, and so it's just so fascinating that you could get something like that. And as a Batman fan, I mean, I would take advantage of that too. It's pirated, sure, but it's like,
of course,
I get to see Batman, new Batman.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. And that's why like I was so happy. I was so excited for this film. And I'm so happy that this film lived up to expectations for me anyways. So, okay, So let's get into talking about the movie here. I want to give you guys a little bit of production info before we jump into like going through the movie in order, because there is some fascinating stuff into this. Basically, Christopher Nolan had directed Insomnia in 2003, and it was because of that Warner Brothers said, hey, would you consider doing Batman? And the only reason he said yes to Batman is that he was like, the only way I'll do Batman is if we can completely ground it in reality, or as much as reality
as a superhero can be.
Superhero can be. Before they shot this film, he invited the whole production crew and the actors over to his house to watch 1982's Blade Runner, because he said, this is the style of our Batman movie. And also, like, I think that explains why Rutger Hauer is cast in this movie as well, the late Rutger Hauer. But that's interesting to me because I don't know about you, Ashley. I don't feel Blade Runner in this movie. Do you?
I don't necessarily. Maybe an aesthetic sensibility.
Okay.
And in the idea that Blade Runner, when you compare Blade Runner to a lot of the other science fiction and science fantasy that was coming out at the time,
yes,
it feels quote unquote gritty and quote unquote real world compared to Back to the Future or Star Wars. And this movie does the same thing for the superhero genre because Batman Begins and Dark Knight really get lumped in with Superman Returns a lot, which obviously happening around the same time in the same zeitgeist. And I will say Rutger Hauer rocks in this movie.
Rutger Hauer
is amazing.
Does rock in this movie. A couple of things. You may or may not have known this, but Christopher Nolan famously does not use second unit on any of his films. So all the action scenes, it's his hand behind the camera. Most movies, they farm that out to a second unit and let them completely direct the action scenes. But Christopher Nolan directs everything in all of his movies. And this is the only of the 3 Batman movies that was a team up on the score. It was Hans Zimmer and one of my personal favorites, James Newton Howard. Hans Zimmer took all the Batman parts. James Newton Howard took all the Bruce parts. And I'll be honest with you, and Mark, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. I think the James Newton Howard parts are better than the Hans Zimmer parts because I think there's a real humanity and a real heart to the Bruce Wayne themes. And I feel those parts are missing in The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. What do you feel about the scores of all 3 of these movies?
It's not only my favorite score of the 3 movies, I think it also is probably post 2000s my favorite superhero score as well. Like I give Alan Silvestri a lot of credit for what he's done with the Avengers and Junkie XL. I think it did a very credible job with Batman v Superman. But this is just, I think that this is the most memorable, if that makes sense, like the most replayable, the most radio friendly, if you will. And it also, when you talk about the action scenes too, that's very interesting. I didn't know that Nolan never used second unit on any of the action, because I also think of the trilogy, these action scenes are the best of the 3. I never really bought it. One of my criticisms of The Dark Knight Rises is that the action it just didn't look as believable to me as what I saw with Batman Begins.
Well, so fun fact, in my research for this podcast, I researched because I've noticed that as well. Like, you can tell in The Dark Knight that Batman fights a little differently. So apparently for Batman Begins, and this is the only one they did it, they employed 2 fighting styles for Batman. One was they decided to do this style called flash fighting, where it's this idea
Barry Allen comes in and fights for you.
Technically, no. Although that would be very funny. No, it's the idea that you're moving on your opponent fast and furious, with the idea that you're trying to overwhelm him so he can't stay up with you, which feels very Batman. And the other style is the style of fighting that was designed in Spain in the 1980s, which is called Keysay fighting. I might be saying that wrong, but it's like Keysi, but it's the idea as well of like being very improv based with your fighting and being very reactive to how people are fighting you, which again, it feels very Batman. But for Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises, I don't know why they didn't use either of those styles of fighting.
It's interesting to me because what I saw with Batman 2005 is it was getting to, and every action movie that was coming out around that time was kind of utilizing that Paul Greengrass Bourne identity style. Mm-hmm. And I always think about my dad when I watch action movies because the Bourne Identity was the movie that he loved and hated at the same time because he loved the story, but he just could not get into all like the jump cutty action scenes. And I think that with Batman Begins, it really has a nice marriage of the fast cuts for sure, but you also get to see enough of the mano a mano fighting style that makes it feel like you're watching an action movie and not just a crazy music video.
This opening fight that people who are watching this podcasting, famously a visual medium, are seeing at the beginning when Bruce is in the prison camp, I think is so good and so well choreographed. And I wish if this had come out like 5 years earlier or 5 years later, we would have actually been able to see all of the choreography.
Oh, yeah.
Because I do think the choreography is a little wasted in this movie because this was the height of shaky cam fight scenes, and I like to see people pretend to hit each other.
Let's talk about let's get into the movie here, and I want to ask both of your opinions. And actually, I would love to go you first because you're the comic book expert. I'm sorry, Mark.
Hey, I will never. If I walk into a bar and they say we're having comic book trivia, and I see Ashley is in the corner, I'm like, you know what? I'll get a drink somewhere else. I don't want any part of it.
It's like hit another saloon, buckaroo.
Let me tell you about the '90s Robin.
So each of these three movies do not begin with any text. There, but by the way, I know this movie is called Batman Begins. I did not mean for a pun there. I did not go for a Begins pun. I'm sorry. Anyways, all three of these movies begin with no text and sort of a loose stylistic symbol, not even a logo. The opening of this movie is bats forming the bat signal. I think I can't remember what they do in Dark Knight, but Dark Knight Rises it's the ice. The ice breaks into the bat symbol. What do you guys think about this? Ashley, what do you think about this opening the movie with like symbolistically style symbol of Batman symbol?
Symbolically?
There's a lot of symbols in that. I don't know why I said symbol 50 times.
Well, I like bats. I'm pro bats. So I like their inclusion here. Every bat in this movie is CG, which I think is unfortunate because they're really cute, but it's nice to know that no animals were harmed in the making of Batman. I think it tells you everything you need to know about this movie tonally.
Okay.
Because we could have just come out with the yellow shield and the bat symbol, or we could have had a text overlay that's, Bruce Wayne is the son of Thomas Wayne, who was this magnate in Gotham City and da-da-da-da. And I think this really sets the stage for what we're going into. And it's kind of like a well-crafted academic paper. The thesis right up front. And then they use this motif of the symbol that's not the symbol repeatedly. I think with
coming to symbol of fear.
Your mileage on it may vary. I think Falcone on the bat symbol looks like a blob in the sky. I don't think it really recalls a bat as much as they're hoping.
I do agree with that. Yes.
And sometimes your mileage varies depending on the story about do you believe that Bruce Wayne is actually afraid of bats? But I think for the opening, I think it's very clever.
Yeah. Mark, how do you feel about this?
Well, it would be really funny if they put Marconi on the bat signal and it just looks like a blob. And so some schlub like me comes running up like, hey, I saw my signal. Oh, God, I'm so out of shape. I like what that opening does with the bats. It really is both extremes at the same time because it is this huge grandiose kind of opening because it's all these bats flying together, but it also is very reductionist in the sense that it's not making a lot out of it. Whereas the Tim Burton 1989 Batman, the whole opening credits is just we're taking a tour
zooming the bat signal,
of the bat signal with this huge Danny Elfman theme, and this one is like, look, we're taking this into a new generation. Thanks, appreciate what you did, Timmy. We're moving this into a new era, and part of that is going back to basics. This is like a rebuilding Batman phase, and by brick, and show you how he got to be Batman.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing is because also this movie begins in very much, and I hate to say this, but this is how I think people nowadays would talk about this. It begins in a very Man of Steel way, even though Man of Steel took it from this, that starting this movie in an Asian prison in some country that we don't know, Nepal, China, Mongolia, who knows? Some Asian prison in the mountains somewhere. here's Bruce Wayne. He's in prison, a place we've never seen him before. And then
unless you've read Bruce Wayne Murderer.
Well, that's true. Nerd. Anyways, and you know, and then Liam Neeson shows up. This is like a very weird way to start this movie, but also I think for 2005, this was part of the reason why this movie hit, because I don't think people ever expected them. Like, I don't think you would ever see a Marvel movie start this way.
That's so funny, because I think if you look at this through the lens of being a comic book nerd, I don't think this is actually that unexpected.
Sure.
Because Silver Age and Bronze Age stories, especially Batman stories, and then a lot of the new Marvel characters, like the Defenders that were coming up, there's a bit of exoticism here dealing with Asian culture and Asian fighting culture. Thank you, Bruce Lee. We love you. And when we're and that's where like Batman trained as a ninja. That's where that comes from. Wolverine gets that story. That's where Iron Fist, Shang-Chi all come from. So I think if you're looking at it through like, I don't consider myself a comic book historian, but if you want to look at it through that lens, I think it actually makes a lot of sense. But I think in terms of a filmic point of view, that's where you're like, wow, I never thought I was going to see Bruce Wayne in what's essentially a gulag.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, growing up in that era of the 90s, like I did, I'm obviously no comic book historian, but I can also tell you that I would go to the comic shop every week to see what's new in the box. And a lot of times when you get those darker tones, Batmans that, you know, like the Miller kind of Batman, even Batman, the animated series could occasionally get dark. So I think that growing up around the era that I did, or obviously younger than me as Ashley, is that we were a little more conditioned to being able to see that this could be the way that you take a Batman movie. And I think that maybe in the back of my mind, that's what turned me off so much to Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, is that this didn't feel like the Batman that I was reading about in the comics at the same time.
Interesting. All right, so I want to talk about, I flashed him up on the screen here if you're watching the live stream, Mr. Liam Neeson's. Now, this was, if you don't know, 2005 was the year of the Neeson, because not only did he have a voice cameo in Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, but literally a month earlier than this movie, he also played very much almost the same exact role in a Ridley Scott movie named Kingdom of Heaven. Literally a month before this movie was released, he's playing like a sort of mentor, except he's not the bad guy in that movie. I actually think that Henry Ducard is a old school Batman character. I think it's an amazing pull by David Goyer to put him in the script. But I guess we might as well talk about him all the way through. What do we think about Liam Neeson in this role? And also, what do we think about them taking the Liam Neeson good mentor archetype and turning it evil? He is the secret antagonist of this movie, which, by the way, when I watched this for the first time on, as I like to call it, the this my Snyder cut of Batman Begins, I never saw Ra's al Ghul being Liam Neeson coming. I never predicted it in a million years.
He's also at this time voicing Aslan in the Narnia movies as well.
Oh,
for another mentor position.
Just the year before, yeah. What do you think about that, Mark? Liam Neeson good in the movie? Is the reveal of him being Ra's al Ghul a good choice?
It's great, and you can clearly see whoever was the brain trust behind the Taken franchise watching Batman Begins and being like, we got to get this guy. This guy's still got some action left in him. And what I do love about
he's a ninja.
He's such a great device, because the twist totally surprised me too, because we're just used to like, oh, here's the bad guy, let's stop him. With Liam Neeson in this, it's like showing you that Batman's methodology of fighting crime is going to continue to haunt him throughout his stellar career, is that he saves this guy's life who trained him, thinking he's doing the right thing, thinking he's doing the just thing. And yet that really comes back to bite him in the ass when he finds out, oh, wait, this is Ra's al Ghul. And so we're going to feel the same way when he has to combat Joker or Bane or whoever else he's going to go on to fight. It's like, this is the thing that this guy has to rectify, is that he can't reduce himself to being the criminals, but because he holds himself to such a moral code of chivalry, it might end up harming him, or at least making him burn a lot more calories.
I kept making jokes during this movie when we rewatched this movie last night that I was like, hey, in the Dark Knight Rises community, Bane is just off camera. So like when Liam Neeson would say certain lines, like he was like, "You are my greatest student, Bruce," and Bane would be like, "I'm right over here. Hey, Roz, what about me?"
What I think is interesting and effective about this character is ultimately the writing on him, because in the whole opening training sequences, he has all these lines that are such Batman lines. So there's things that Batman would say or feel like comic book accurate.
Oh yeah,
Batman. But I think the unfortunate thing, and we talked about this on last week's episode, is Ra's al Ghul is a Middle Eastern person who should be portrayed by certainly a person of color, if not a Middle Eastern actor. And I think it's a freaking bummer that Ken Watanabe, who's incredible, is only pretend Ra's al Ghul.
Well, you got to say this. I mean, I totally agree with you. Ken Watanabe, amazing actor. He would have been a fantastic Ra's al Ghul. But my hope is that Christopher Nolan as well realized that and then was like, this is why I'm going to bring you over to Inception. This is why I'm going to give you this is why you're going to be the big boss rich man in Inception.
At least we can forgive our sins of the past if we give you a meatier role that's more fitting to you in the future. But the Ashley's take on how comic booky it feels, particularly with Liam Neeson, like when he's delivering that speech to Bruce at that moment when it's like, am I going to be in the League of Shadows? Am I going to go off on my own? And he's talking about how society is not going to hold him to any less standard or more standard than criminals, that you're going to have to deal with corrupt bureaucrats at every point. It's you feel defeated hearing him say that, because a lot of what he's saying rings true. And it's like, man, this Batman guy is going to have to climb a mountain of paperwork and red tape in order to accomplish his mission in Gotham.
He's going to have to literally crawl out of a pit in 2 movies with a broken back.
Yes.
That heals in 8 hours.
Can we talk really quick about the League of Shadows versus League of Assassins of this whole movie?
I mean, I know Mark, being a huge comic book fan, has a hot take on this one.
I heard League of Shadows and I was like, oh, that sounds awesome. That sounds familiar. Have I heard that somewhere before? And that's the extent of my knowledge. Back to you, the experts.
So when they were making this movie, they're called the League of Assassins in the comic books, in the Batman cartoon,
in Arrow.
Well, Arrow comes after this, but yes,
Mm-hmm.
in Arrow, or as I like to call it, Arrow Begins, because it's just this movie stretched over a season. And I guess Warner Brothers was like, you can murder people, but you cannot call them the League of Assassins.
Well, because they want to
change the name to League of Shadows instead.
Even for how dark this movie is, they did want it to have an entire family appeal.
Yeah.
And apparently that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was the point where they were like, well, we have explosions, we have gangsters that'll just shoot anybody, but if we call this group the League of Assassins, that's where parents will go crazy.
See, I thought it was maybe just like it was some sort of thing because like X-Men has mutant copyrighted, and so nobody else can say mutant. You have to say like, oh, people with other types of powers. And like I thought it was just somebody else had assassin down already, but that's a much better and accurate explanation.
By the way, perfect timing here, because Adam Grunther came in here with a super chat saying, why do you think Christopher Nolan changed the name of League of Assassins to the League of Shadows?
Well,
let me tell you, Adam. Jason Asher, I'll feel this one. You see, Adam.
Thank you, Mark.
You just rewind the show. You'll figure it out.
Luckily for us, this is a really well documented. So like that's not conjecture. That's really why this happened.
Yeah, it was Warner Brothers executives basically forcing him to be more family friendly, which is kind of ridiculous. But Adam, thank you for that super chat and that question. All right, so I want to talk about this. A big part of this movie is flashing back to the murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne and seeing all the Martha shenanigans. Although Martha does not have a very big part in this movie.
Martha does not speak, nor does she get named.
She does. No, she does.
At any point in this movie.
She does speak. She says, I think she has one line after the opera where she goes,
you're right, when they leave, and Thomas covers for Bruce.
Yeah, she's like, oh, Bruce, was this you? Are you a little scaredy pants? And Thomas was like, no, it's me.
Thomas is right, though. Opera's exhausting.
Yeah, opera is exhausting. But to be honest with you, I really like the actor that plays Thomas Wayne in this movie. I really like seeing young Michael Caine. And I actually think the actor that plays young Bruce does a pretty good job. Mark, it has been stated over and over and over again that we never never need to see the murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne ever on screen ever again. Especially after, I would say, Joker's portrayal, where Joker was the one movie where I was like, okay, certainly we won't see it. And then Joker decided to throw it in there. They're like, hey, in case you forgot, Martha and Thomas Wayne get murdered.
Shout out to Linus Roach, who plays Thomas Wayne.
He does an excellent job, I think. But Mark, 2005, I really like these flashbacks. This was one of the first times I felt Thomas was a real character and not just an archetype to be murdered so that Bruce can become Batman. What did you feel about these flashbacks?
It gives us so much context into the character of Bruce. And that's why I'm so thankful that we get as much as we do of Thomas Wayne, because it shows you that incredible dichotomy of this mogul, this super billionaire guy who's trying to make the city better. And then you see after the murder what his son, the path that his son goes down, that is just totally seemingly the opposite, where he's stealing stuff halfway around the world. And you also get to know that he's been, kind of sweet on Rachel since they were little kids. And so there's just so much fleshing out. You get Alfred, you get to see the close relationship that Alfred had with the entire Wayne family. And then when Bruce eventually comes back to Gotham City, you see how important the Wayne name is, how much weight that carries. And the fact that now this guy's back, it changes the whole direction. It kind of puts it on its axis as far as Gotham City now having a Wayne back. And then it's up to Bruce to say, well, now that I'm the Wayne in charge, what am I going to do with stuff?
Yes. And I really do think for the time for this reset, we did need the origin because there had been so much time.
Well, and actually, if you look at Adam West's Batman 66, they mention the murder. They never show it. Even
would have been a big tonal shift for that show.
Yeah, right. Well, chum, let me tell you about when my parents were brutally murdered in an alleyway, chum.
Gee, Batman, please do.
Okay. Martha got a bullet right to the face, chum. The blood splattered right on my face. And at the time, I thought it was cool. But
she gets shot in the head and it just goes a biff. Pow.
Yeah. Grievous head wound.
Murder.
Murder flashes across the screen. Robin, it comes back to Robin. He's crying. Burt Ward's Robin. It's like, oh, dear God.
Robin, my parents were eaten by sharks, and that's why I always carry shark spray with me at all times.
But even the Michael Keaton movies, you just see flashes of it. You never actually really see it. And besides Batman Forever, it really never truly affects him, which is really, really weird, I think, sometimes.
I'll speak up here as a member of Dead Parents Club. That is something that I think should always also be addressed in Batman. I don't know if it always needs to be a full seat. But yes, okay. I think to leave it out of the storytelling, I think is naive. But I hope that the next time we get a Batman origin, I hope you're listening, Robert Pattinson and co., Martha actually gets to do something. That would be really nice.
Ooh, okay. All right.
It'd be very welcome. And with Batman 1989, I mean, you get the sense that his parents die, but that opening scene is as much about establishing Jack Napier as the villain as it is Bruce going through this torment. Because in Batman Begins, what's so important about how much we see of the Wayne family is that not only were they his parents, but they were good parents. Like
they were good parents. Yeah.
They had a connection. And that is going to leave you feeling even more empty once you lose them, as opposed to just, oh, he's rich and he's mainly raised by Alfred.
Now, we have a great question here that I think is going to set off a hot debate.
I don't know if it's going to be that hot.
Well, it won't be that hot. But I want to cover this before we get to my favorite scene in this entire movie. Adam Grunther has a super chat here. It says, what are your thoughts on Katie Holmes as Rachel? And do you wish she came back for The Dark Knight? Now, it's funny. During this movie, Ash and I were talking about this. And this was, I think, the height and the end of Katie Holmes's basic career, because from what I understand, I could be completely wrong about this, and I actually did no research into this.
Rumors and conjecture.
I believe the reason why Katie Holmes did not come back for Dark Knight is because she married Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise and the Church of Scientology said, no, you cannot do that movie.
That was at least the rumor, whether or not it's true.
Yes. I'll say this. I'll start this off. I like the character of Rachel Dawes. I think Rachel Dawes is an excellent character in this movie for us as the audience to sort of view Bruce through, to see Bruce before and after the training with the League of Assassins / Shadows, depending on what WB executives are feeling that day. But I will say this, Katie Holmes, if not for the brilliant writing and dialogue of David S. Goyer, oh boy, those Rachel Dawes scenes would be real rough.
The interesting thing about going back and revisiting this in a post-Arrow world is she's just like Laura Lance is just Rachel Dawes.
Oh yeah,
on the Arrow TV show.
They're both lawyers. Yes,
they're literally both assistant DAs. Like I hadn't really thought about that because Laurel is also a character I'm not super hot on. I don't necessarily understand why we needed an original female character here because Bruce has had 185,000 girlfriends since 1939. I actually wish we'd had Selina Kyle in some way, shape, or form. Oh,
you could have put Selina Kyle in this role.
And she's a big part of year one. That story that's obviously heavily influenced.
My projection or conjecture would be that, and just knowing the type of filmmaker and writer that Nolan is, I would guess Nolan wanted his own character to mold any way he saw fit, because I think this is also the reason why we did not see Richard Grayson as Robin in The Dark Knight Rises.
I don't want to talk about that.
we won't, that could fill 3 hours. But anyways, Nolan is one of these filmmakers that I feel like if you name a character like Harvey Dent or something like that, he feels like he has to acknowledge the past history, the past stories. Whereas Rachel Dawes does not exist anywhere in DC Comics, so he can do whatever he wants to. Mark, what do you feel about Katie Holmes and Rachel Dawes in this movie?
Jason, Ashley, I don't want to wait for our lives to be over to talk about how I actually...
Be careful, Mark, or I will drown you in Dawson's Creek.
I'll just be standing on a canoe crying. I liked her as Rachel Dawes. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's just my primordial ooze mind that they can't really separate how great the script is versus her performance of it. But I believed her. I believed her as the love interest. I believed her as somebody who was fighting for justice in a corrupt system. And so I had no problem with her. I also didn't really have a big issue that they replaced her with Maggie Gyllenhaal, who's a fantastic actress. So I was good either way. And I don't have any real strong takes on it, but I am happy that she is not Selina Kyle. And I'll tell you why is because I feel like Christopher Nolan just is one of these filmmakers that, kind of echoing what you said, Jason, is that he just doesn't want to be beholden to all of the lore, and he doesn't want to throw in Easter eggs just for funsies. He's not that kind of guy. And I think that the most that you're going to get from him is that, playing card that we get at the end of the movie. But obviously that wasn't just a thing for the fans. That was setting up a whole other film. So unless the character's purpose is to do that, then he'd just rather not bother with them.
Oh, by the way, I want to point out one of my favorite comments of this entire live stream. Leighton Wagner got a super sticker and then also said, "Love you guys," with a smiley face.
Aww.
Which is very nice.
Love you too, buddy.
Oh, thank you so much. All right. Now the time has come for
you to lip sync for your life.
Yes, I know.
That's a joke for the 4 RuPaul's Drag Race fans.
Oh, I thought we were going for a Dawson's Creek joke, and I was going to say, "Stop it, Pacey."
Yes, my Canadian, my fellow Canadian.
You need to watch it, Joshua Jackson. So, Mark, you mentioned earlier that I believe that you said, Leighton Wagner also said, just real quick, love your guys' shirts. I assume she's talking about Mark.
I mean,
this is Adidas. This is from my workout earlier today. I have a shirt of Batman and Superman running together like they're the Mario brothers in their costumes, but really that is currently in the wash.
We actually debated. Jason said, "I don't think Mark's going to wear a Batman shirt." I said, "Mark probably has a Batman shirt."
Well, you have Molly the super dog behind you, which makes up for everything. I want to talk about my favorite scene in this movie, and I'm going to preposition this with, this is my favorite scene in any comic book movie. 100%. This is the scene that I like to call, the training is nothing, the will is everything. The moment where Ra's al Ghul, Henry Ducard, says, your parents' death was not your fault, it was your father's. And then Bruce goes ape shit crazy here. Which is very interesting. And I love that they actually is filmed on a real glacier in Iceland that Ashley and I have considered visiting. What do you think about Ducard's training? I would love to hear your thoughts specifically on this scene, because I think this scene is so powerful. I think it's the best piece of music from this movie. Is Ra's al Ghul right? Is his philosophy that it is the will of the person, the training means nothing? Because there is a lot of philosophy thrown out in this movie, and I think it's part of the reason why I like this. Ashley, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Is Ra's al Ghul right? Is this a good attitude to have.
No, that's so goddamn rude to say about his poor dead parents. That's so harsh. It makes for a great scene.
Yes.
This is an amazing scene, and this will lead you to understand why Batman acts like a complete insane person when he gets back to Gotham.
Well, Batman is called the Super Dick sometimes, or Bat Dick.
Well, yeah, Super Dick Batman actually in comics is like right around this time as well.
Pretty close.
I disagree with the training is nothing, the will is everything.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that your will can carry you a long way. But if you've ever tried to hit someone who has actual martial arts training, they're going to hit you first.
But the will is everything.
Doesn't matter. If you can't throw a punch, you can't throw a punch.
Oh, dang it. There go my plans for tonight.
I think I'm also hoping that you're going to bring up your thoughts about the scallops. But what I like best about this scene, honestly, is we get to see
I got to find that clip.
The fight is so good. So I'll preface it.
Please vamp, Ashley.
Jason and I watched this last night. And the part where Ducard catches it with the little ninja scallops, he goes, "This is when I finally realized what those things were for."
Okay, yeah. So there. This is the best screenshot I could get of it. So Batman, since I think the 1960s redesign, because originally when Batman showed up, he had purple gloves.
They were amazing.
Batman had these little scallops on his gloves, and for the longest times, I thought they were just decorational. So when I saw this movie on my Snyder Cut DVD in 2005 with the shaky cam and people speaking French, and he caught the sword and stopped it, I immediately, like, it was like somebody had shown me the Rosetta Stone, and finally I understood English, because I had no idea that those were functional until this movie.
Well, because sometimes the only way that I've ever seen them use in a Batman comic is usually to catch yourself as you're about to fall off a rooftop, which is not how scallop should be used. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the coolest things about this fight scene is, other than when Lucius comes in, you get to see a lot of the origin of Batman's design as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that if you are into parkour, scallops are not going to save you. But
but the will is everything.
If Jason didn't know what those were used for, you know who else didn't know? Bruce Wayne. And that's one of the reasons why I love this scene, is because you can literally see through Bruce's anger that he's also kind of filing stuff for, if I'm going to become an idea, if I'm going to become more than a man, if I'm going to become this mission statement, then I'm going to need to take care of my body. I'm going to need protection. I'm going to need a lot of shields. I'm going to need all this cool stuff. So in the back of his mind, that's what he's thinking. He knows he's got the wallet for it, and now he just has to survive this training, which Ducard in this, I feel like it's the toughest coach that you could possibly have in sports. He is Vince Lombardiing. He's a more topical reference for basketball would be Tom Thibodeau, where it's just tough love all day, just running gassers every time in practice, and he's making someone a champion.
Mark, let me ask you this question. You know, as an internet movie pundit, and we are as well, you know, you're part of the Movie Trivia Schmodown, Schmo's No Movie Review Show. Comments I hear a lot on Twitter, and especially over the last 5 years, are people like, man, keep your philosophies and your politics out of movies. I just want to watch movies of people punching. This movie is so layered with metaphors and philosophies, and like there's a big like, don't be afraid. The will is everything. The training, like this movie is all about crashing philosophies, basically coming against each other harder than actual villains fight each other. What do you feel about that in this movie? Do those work? Are there too many? How do you feel about this?
I think it works because it doesn't hit you over the head with the fact that we are getting political or we're getting philosophical, but it works because both sides make sense. You can actually see how both sides came to their reasoning. When Ducard is talking, or when who we think is Ra's al Ghul is talking, and they're talking about how, oh no, we've been around for a while. History is on their side. It brings up Constantinople, Rome. That wasn't yesterday. That was a long time ago. And so clearly this strategy works. Now, whether it would have worked if they applied it to Gotham like what they wanted to do, that remains to be seen. Bruce stood in the way of that. But I love that we have this thing as an audience where they're making a lot of sense, but this guy's Batman, so I'm going to kind of root for him, but it's just not as clear cut. And so it makes us think more. And yes, I love that people still get upset at political references, even though their favorite MCU movie is called Captain America: Civil War.
Yes. Yes, that's a very apt point. I love it.
I also think it speaks to the level of intelligence and respect that went into writing the script, because if you are and I'm going to say well-educated, and I don't necessarily mean that you have to go get a degree, but if you're well-read and you're interested in the world, then you'll come across all these weird things like, oh, that's what the scallops are actually for. So we can put these in here. Oh, this is maybe a Confucius quote or something from a Zen philosophy. We can put that in there. And all of that compounds to explain why Batman is smarter, better, faster, stronger than everyone. And I love this quote from The Dark Knight wearing hockey pads.
Yes. All right. So I want to talk about, as I search for a screen grab of him and cannot find it.
Okay.
I want to talk about Jonathan Crane, the Scarecrow, the sort of B villain of this movie. First live action appearance in this movie. He's played by Cillian Murphy, who was a runner-up for the role of Bruce Wayne. Ashley, I know you are steeped in Scarecrow and Batman lore. What do you feel about his portrayal? Is he excellent in this movie? And do you like that he is sort of like the minor villain through the next two?
I do want to say that do we have a Geek History lesson on Scarecrow? I think we have a Geek History
ask
lesson
Google. I will find out.
I thought we did. I can't remember. And now,
I don't think we did.
Now that I've spoken those words, they're going to prove to not be true.
Well, everyone, if you want to request it, go to that GHL podcast or email us at geekhistorylesson@gmail.com.
I think not starting with the Joker was so smart.
Yes.
I'm also of the opinion that he could go back in the...
We do not, by the way.
Okay. I think that he could go back in the toy box for a little while, because a character like this, and then they do it in the second movie with Harvey Dent, also kind of as your B villain, your B plot villain, are so interesting. And there is such fertile ground. I think Cillian Murphy is a wonderful actor. I think he doesn't get enough credit and doesn't get the roles that he deserves. He's like the sequel king. So it's kind of amazing that he's in the first one of this trilogy. He's so good. He's so creepy. And it's an intelligent choice, because it kind of goes along with the philosophical river that this movie is. And man, his dialect work is out of control here. He is so freaking good. And the mask is so good, because even without all the bugs, it's a creepy looking mask.
So fun fact here, I learned Christopher Nolan did not want to use the Scarecrow mask in this movie, and David S. Goyer had to convince him. He was like, you have to do it. The comic book fans are going to want the mask. And Christopher Nolan was like, I don't know, maybe. And then he did it. I don't know why he sounds like Paul McCartney. Just go with it. But that is now canon. Christopher Nolan sounds like Paul McCartney.
I can't wait for him to show up on the Christmas episode.
Mark, what do you think about Scarecrow, my friend?
I hate to correct you, Jason. That was more of a George Harrison kind of tenor.
Oh, is it a George Harrison?
With,
Nolan here. I don't like my taxes.
Actually, that's a little Ringo. Yeah. So I can actually, in talking about Scarecrow, I can give you all just a free stand-up lesson for all the kids watching. Is that like when you're constructing a joke, ideally you have a premise that's believable, that's grounded in reality, and then the joke is this far-fetched kind of reality, and you need something to bridge those two to get the audience to come along with you on this idea that's going to get sillier and sillier. Now, with Scarecrow, that's the bridge villain, where you feel like it's grounded in reality. The guy's a doctor, he's got a degree, and then he also has this mask that makes people do kooky things. And so we're starting to see in this world that while it does feel more grounded in reality, there is going to be a link to these villains that get a little nuttier and a little more comic booky, but we needed somebody to bridge that gap. And it was very wise on Nolan's part to not open with a character that everybody and their mom and their grandma knows who it is. Scarecrow, B villain is one way to put it. I would say a deeper cut villain. And I think that it worked brilliantly, because we're also, in this movie, that's the title of it. We're not trying to overshadow the big guy.
Yeah, he needs to begin in. He needs to begin in. Yes, you're right. He actually is very critical to this movie, and that's something that I think this movie does very well. That was sort of the folly of the previous Batman series, where that like Batman Forever, for instance, Two-Face starts out as the A villain, Riddler is the B villain, but by the end of the movie they flip. And I always remember from that movie, I was like, no, like Two-Face should be the main villain here. The Riddler should not be the main villain. So I like that Scarecrow at no point in this movie is really treated as the B villain. He is just as competent. He matters that much to the plot. And I mean,
we just mean like the B plot.
Oh, sure. I mean, he burns Batman and throws him off a roof, depending on what version of this movie you watch.
When we watched that, I was like, could you imagine if you were just a citizen of Gotham? It's like Batman's been around for 5 days. You've never heard of him. And you just see a guy in a batsuit on fire in the street. Like, that's wild.
No, imagine, because there's in the shot where he gets burned and he goes on the roof and he pulls out his phone. He calls Alfred. You can see people's windows with lights. Imagine that outside your window, you're just hearing this guy in a batsuit being like, Alfred, I need help.
The voice is, he's not full. Where's the trigger in this movie?
No.
Yeah.
No, actually, yeah, in this movie, his Batman voice is basically it's Christian Bale, just more gravelly.
Yeah.
It's the Dark Knight where he becomes the parody of himself. All right, so I want to let's talk about another. This movie is full of amazing casting here. Let's talk about Lucius Fox. Now, I love Lucius Fox in this movie, mainly because he's Morgan Freeman, but also I like and hate the idea that he's basically Q from the James Bond franchise. He's like, hey, Batman, here's your gadgets. Because typically in the comic books, a lot of it is Batman invents these things himself through trial and error and things like that. But I understand for a movie, we got to simplify stuff. We got to move stuff along. Ashley, what do you feel about that? Lucius Fox, Morgan Freeman, is basically like, hey, here's your buffet of bat toys.
Well, Lucius was a character I never ever thought I was going to see in a movie, so that's really cool.
You know who created this? Fans of our podcast will love this. Do you know who created Lucius Fox?
Danny O'Neill?
No, the great Len Wein, the guy who created Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Swamp Thing.
Everyone we love.
Basically, every character in comic books you love, Len Wein made them.
Yeah, truly, especially on the Marvel side.
Yes.
Morgan Freeman is inspired casting, because for the time, who would it have been? Morgan Freeman or Denzel? Maybe
Dennis Haysbert if you could have pulled him away from 24.
That's true for the time. I think he's amazing. I love that they just draw him as Morgan Freeman now. I don't mind him functioning as Q because it's such an easy way to explain this is how Batman gets all of his toys. And I love the line where he goes, Mr. Wayne, if you don't tell me what you're doing with this, I don't have to lie about it, but don't take me for an idiot. Like, that is so perfect. And in a lot of ways, when Lucius comes on the team, and then we get the scene later where they've somehow got him into the car, as one of the commenters pointed out, and he wakes up after being gassed. It's kind of like Bruce Wayne has two daddies, and I'm into that.
By the way, before we get too far down the rabbit hole of Lucius Fox, I do want to point out, Denny O'Neill, the great Batman creator that did just recently pass away at the time of this recording, yesterday, I believe. He is known. We should give him mad shout outs because Denny O'Neill is the co-creator of Ra's al Ghul.
And Talia.
The villain of this movie. So we should give a nice tip of the hat that we lost this. One of the greatest Batman writers of all time. So, but Mark, your thoughts on Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox in this movie?
Absolutely love it. And I love the way that you can explain away why this character is in the movie in the first place, is because, again, we see that Wayne family bond where it's an old friend of Thomas Wayne's. And so he's just down there in the basement tinkering away with this multi-billion-dollar company. Nobody's really paying attention to this genius who helped build the light rail system in Gotham. And it just gives him all the time in the world to dream up this stuff so that Bruce Wayne doesn't have to. Bruce Wayne is busy figuring out what sort of things he can pick out of every culture across the world to incorporate into his new persona. So he doesn't really have time to tinker with which fabric is going to repel the most bullets or which tumbler is going to look best for his Batmobile. It makes it so much simpler in a way that is believable and is consistent with the rest of the movie that he is involved in Wayne Enterprises.
Yeah. I do love the scene where they're driving together in the Tumbler for the first time. And Jason told me this when we were watching it, that they would not let Christian Bale drive the Tumbler.
Apparently like Christian Bale during the filming of this movie wanted to drive the Tumbler.
Who wouldn't?
And they only had two of them and they were like, absolutely not. We cannot afford anything. But here is a fun story. The giant chase sequence that happens with the Tumbler later in this movie when Batman is smashing cars and the cops are like, it's a tank. Apparently, one of the Tumblers was crashed into by a drunk driver. So a drunk driver.
That's not a fun story.
No, so the tumbler was parked, and the guy just like apparently hit it at like 10 miles per hour, like coming around a corner. And apparently, when he got out of the car, he was like, "What is that? A tank?" and they kind of were like, "Oh, we wrote a good script."
Wow.
As long as
okay. I gotta check where I was that night. Was I in Gotham City that night?
Were you there, Mark?
Chicago?
So this is actually, it's almost like you can see my notes.
Almost.
You're great at segues either way. I want to talk about this, the Tumbler. It is very divisive online, so I want to get everybody's opinions about the Tumbler on this podcast. Mark, do you like the design of the Tumbler? And then also, I would love to hear, what is your favorite Batmobile? Do you have a favorite Batmobile? And it doesn't even have to be live action. It could be from the comics or the cartoons or whatever. But Tumbler, yay or nay?
The Tumbler I'm yay for in Nolan's trilogy, because it seems to be the kind of vehicle that makes the most sense. It's very utilitarian. It's not the prettiest Batmobile. It's probably the ugliest Batmobile we've ever seen. But if you are actually trying to stop crime in your city and you want as much protection and firepower as possible, that's probably what your design is going to look like. And that's what we all fell in love with Batman Begins. Is it's like everybody saw that movie and walked out of the theater thinking, you know what, if I had $1 billion, I could do that too. And you could also have a Tumbler. I just don't know how practical the very phallic but very cool 1989 Batmobile is. It does look great. And I think my favorite Batmobile is I'm going all the way back to the 60s, man. I'm a classic car guy, and it's just such a cool car. And come on, if you have a red car phone, you sold me.
I believe also that's a Lincoln. Wasn't it like a Lincoln Chrysler or something like that? Chrysler Lincoln?
It's on display in LA.
Yeah.
If you're in Southern California, there's a shop. It's currently boarded up, but hopefully they're still in business. I think it's called Barris Custom Auto, and it's on Riverside and Lancashire, right north Hollywood. And they have that classic Batmobile, or at least a model of that exact one that is in the store. So you can actually go look at it. And one time I was driving by and the poor thing was being towed because they had to do some work on it. And I took a picture of it and I said, this is the current state of the DCEU, because it was like right when, you know, at the bottom before we didn't know what we were doing and nothing was really getting critical acclaim. So that was an old joke, but I had to bring it up.
If you actually also, if you are in Southern California, I don't know if it's open or not, but the Peterson Automotive Museum also has a replica of the Batman 66 Batmobile in there. They also have the Batman 89 Batmobile.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Yeah, at Comic-Con, I think a couple years in a row, they would have all of the Batmobiles.
Yes.
So you can just go look at across from Hall H, and like that's a tractor beam for me, man. Just staring at that stuff. And, you know, they look at me like the crew at the Christian Bale, like, kid, there's no way you're getting into one of these.
They also have them on the Warner Brothers studio tour. There's a room that's just the Batmobile.
All right, Ashley. Tumbler, yay or nay?
You know, it's a little tough in these modern times where we are entering into discussions about demilitarizing the police force. But I think this is an ugly vehicle. But however, in terms of form and function, like Mark says, if you're gonna be Batman,
I'm just gonna let you stare at it a little bit more on the live stream, and maybe that'll convince you.
But my favorite thing about this is actually from The Dark Knight, where the little motorcycle pops out of it. I think that's cool AF. I am totally here for that. Yeah, I really like that with the fat tires. But my favorite Batmobile is the animated series Batmobile. So I like a slick, impractical Batmobile myself. Mm-hmm. All right, break my heart. Tell me how much you like it.
I love the Tumbler. I love the Tumbler, and I've said this in many places. The Tumbler is my favorite Batmobile, because it is the only version of the Batmobile. Because Mark, you hit on it perfectly. The Batman '89 Batmobile, while probably the most stylistic and I would say objectively probably the most beautiful, because it looks like a piece of Art Deco that is on wheels and moving, would never be able to smash into the Joker's Joker-mobile and push it to the side of the road. But this tank, oh my God. And one of the things I love about it is just look at how much like a Hummer it looks like. Mm-hmm. It literally looks like a Hummer. It has these giant wheels. It would be impossible to flip this car over. It, to me, is like, it really leans into that Christopher Nolan, what he was going for. The idea that he was like, I'm grounding this in reality. What would the Batmobile actually be? Like, if the Batmobile is going to go up the side of a building, what would that vehicle actually look like? And to be honest with you, I think it would look exactly like this car.
My God, it's ugly.
I mean, yeah, I know, but so is Batman. No, I don't know.
I mean, I don't know how you feel about Christian Bale, but you might think that.
I think Christian Bale's a pretty good looking dude. I mean, he's pretty good looking.
Yeah.
He's no Val Kilmer.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, wait, Val had that chin, man.
Yeah. Val Kilmer in Mark Twain makeup or out of Mark Twain makeup?
Always in. Always.
Of course. That is just
in Mark Twain makeup and then the bat suit over the Mark Twain. I want Mark Twain Batman.
Yes, 10 out of 10.
Yes.
I'll be there opening night. That's what I'm going back to movie theaters for.
We have an excellent super chat here from Samir T, who says, I enjoy Batman Begins way more than The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. No disrespect to them. It's comfort watching for me. It's such a good franchise starter as well, like Raiders or A New Hope. Mark, you mentioned this a little bit earlier too, and without surmising your whole point about this movie, I feel the same way about this movie, that this movie is just, every time I've put it on, I've never gotten bored with it. I always just like, oh man, that's so good. That's so good. Do you feel the same way?
Soul food, man. It's comfort food, but it's not comfort fast food. You run to McDonald's and you eat it and it feels good in the moment, and then you really regret the decision. But it's quality food, and it just reminds you of everything that you love about the movies. And it's not over the top and flashy in the way that people think about when they think about a big blockbuster, a big comic book franchise. So the way that it's able to subvert what our expectations are and yet keep us coming back to this particular movie to start this franchise, I just think it's a magnificent achievement. And I don't think that we get certainly a DCU or an MCU without this movie coming from Christopher Nolan at the time when it did. This movie, I don't think it's an understatement or an overstatement to say that Christopher Nolan helped save what the modern comic book film looks like.
I think
Mark, preach.
You are exactly correct, because Iron Man 1 is 2008, and Iron Man 1 comes out the exact same year as the sequel to this movie, The Dark Knight, which also many people consider to be a game changer, and it is. And this movie is a game changer as well. And it's funny because, and we might get into this a little bit later, but I feel when you talk about Batman Begins, when you talk about comic movies, there is a pre-Batman Begins and there is a post-Batman Begins. And it's so funny because we've seen studios do this a couple of times, actually within the last 5 years. I believe Venom is a version of this, and The Amazing Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 are versions of this. When they released those movies, I can remember a common criticism, one of my criticisms of those movies, where did this director or writer not see Batman Begins? Do they not realize that we have changed how we tell superhero movies now? Like, they're acting like that movie doesn't exist. And I think that there's very much a dividing line with this movie. All right. We cannot leave this movie without talking about two supporting characters. And then we kind of talk about the wrap up of this movie. Michael Caine's Alfred.
Yes.
Ashley, go.
Is there a specific question?
No, I don't even need to set this up. Just beautilicious. That's what I'm going to say.
This is the movie this is the reason that I know who Michael Caine is.
Oh, really?
I didn't know who Michael Caine was before I saw these movies. I'm very young. And it's interesting that this, in a lot of ways, is I think a lot of people are in the same boat as me, where where they were first made aware of him. I love Alfred and Bruce's relationship because it echoes Bruce's later comic book relationships to the various Robins. And the moment where Alfred being an Englishman really drives this home for me. Alfred is talking about the Wayne legacy and the Wayne name and what it means and why you have to take care of it. And then Bruce saying, well, it's not your name. It's not your family. Why do you care? That scene breaks my heart every time. And you said this to me the first year I met you. If you make Alfred cry, you make all the rest of us cry. And I think this movie really echoes that.
Alfred is Batman's real dad.
He's perfect.
Mark, how do you feel about what I think is a stellar performance from Michael Caine in this movie? And I will admit, when I first heard Michael Caine was cast as Alfred in 2004,
you went on Twitter and said, "No way."
No, Twitter didn't exist at that time. I'm certain I Facebooked about it, but I thought he would overwhelm the role because I knew who Michael Caine was. Michael Caine was a great actor, but Michael Caine generally does Michael Caine, and I am happy to admit that 2004 Jason was a stupid idiot, and that I was completely wrong about that. But Mark, how do you feel about Michael Caine as Alfred?
Yeah, that'll be my online Twitter campaign is cancel Jason from 2004.
Well, my Facebook is private, so good luck, everybody.
I love Michael Caine. I mean, I've known about Michael Caine since I was a little kid and saw Jaws: The Revenge and how great he was in that. So it can only go up from there. And with Michael Caine in this movie, the father connection is so strong in this. And I love that this Alfred, we learn later in the series that this Alfred is a badass in his own right and has a lot of experiences doing these kinds of things that now Bruce is going out to do. But how quickly Alfred buys in to what Bruce's mission is going to be. It's one of my favorite scenes, if not my favorite scene in the movie, is when the private jet is on the runway and Bruce is walking towards it, and him and Alfred have that conversation about what's going to happen once I get back to Gotham. And Alfred gets it. He gets what this guy is about. He gets why he disappeared for so long. He understands that this little boy that I helped raise is not some spoiled brat anymore. He is actually going to take his father's mantle in a way to try to repair the city in his own version. And Alfred sees that he's going to become a symbol and not just a man. And so you can see it. And this is how great Michael Caine and the writing is that you can see Alfred realizing what's about to happen. And so Alfred kind of says to himself, I need to take care of this man. I need to take care of Bruce, the person, so that he can go on to become this symbol.
Alfred's also super funny in this.
Well,
and that same scene where he's like, well, I'll let you take the rolls out.
You bring it back with a full take.
Yeah.
You bring it back with a full take.
And
yes.
I don't know how much of that is in the script versus how much of that was improv. But at certain points in a Batman story, you need moments of levity because it can get really heavy. And he provides that for this whole franchise.
Well, it is canon in the comic books that Alfred is just full of sass for Batman.
Even in the animated 100%. Series, I'll draw you a bath, Master Wayne. Like, it's very funny.
Yes, the gag where he draws a picture of an actual bath and hands it to Bruce. And Bruce is like, what? But no, like one of my favorite moments is towards the end of this movie where the log has fallen on Bruce and Alfred comes back in the house and he goes, what's the point of doing all those bloody push-ups if you can't lift a bloody log? You know, which is very true.
Christian Bale truly looks like he's going to kill him.
So there are a couple funny stories with Michael Caine in this. Michael Caine said that this is not his actual dialect in this movie. And he said that he based Alfred's dialect on his British Army instructor when he was 18. Because he felt that he's like, when I read the script, he's like, I really got the sense that Alfred was in the military, which Alfred is in the military in the comic books. And they further established that with the story of the Tangerine. So I think that's a nice little touch that Michael Caine based him off this Army instructor. Also, Christian Bale's first scene that he ever filmed with this movie, and I'll see if I can find it on here as we're talking.
It's the scene where after he's been drugged, he wakes up in bed with his two daddies standing over him, making sure that he's okay.
Yes, and so
hey, you found it.
Yes, I did find it. So is this scene? It was this scene right here where. And apparently Christian Bale said that this was his first scene ever with Michael Caine, his first scene ever with Morgan Freeman. And Christian Bale was like, he said he was very nervous. And Christian Bale said that he fell asleep. And he said that he was like, I don't know how long I was asleep, but he was like, I remember, he's like, my biggest memory of Batman Begins is my first day on set being poked in the ribs by Michael Caine and hearing, I think this bloody fool fell asleep.
I had no idea. That is so fun. And now that's another reason to go back and watch Batman Begins for everybody watching out there, all the fans. It's like, check that out just to watch that scene through that lens. That's great context.
Yeah. It's really great that you're like, oh my, and like I said, like Christian Bale has said that he's like, for the next month, he was like, I felt super embarrassed that my first scene with this great actor I fell asleep in. All right, so another great actor we got to talk about. This movie is just a murderer's row of a cast. Gary Oldman as Commissioner Gordon.
Commissioner Gordon.
Oh yeah, she does a weird dialect to Chicago. Open the bridge. Again, another casting because up to that point he'd mainly played villains, and I was like, "And
Sirius Black.
There is no way that this guy is going to work as Commissioner Gordon," and he knocks it out of the friggin' park. And his scenes with him and Batman sort of being partners, just every instant of it in this movie proves to you why you're like, oh, this is why Commissioner Gordon is one of the greatest characters in the DC universe.
And it gets his scene with young Bruce gets echoed again in The Dark Knight Rises.
Yes.
In one of the best moments of that movie. It's hard to believe that a character like this, that his son can grow up to be murdered by, the Westerosi.
Well, yes. Mark, what do you feel about Gary Oldman, especially like thinking about this from a 2005 perspective? This is Bram Stoker's Dracula being Commissioner Gordon.
So what I thought about this when I saw it is I just got little tiny shades, not an overarching sentiment, but a little bit of him playing Lee Harvey Oswald in JFK. And I'll tell you why. It's because you see this guy who clearly has realized that suddenly, very, unconscious that this was happening the whole time, that he is overwhelmed by the situation that he is now in. For Lee Harvey Oswald, obviously he's part of this huge conspiracy, but with Commissioner Gordon, he's thinking everybody else on this police force is corrupt and is on the take. And so he has that internal struggle with, I don't know what to do. You see the sadness in his eyes where he's like, look, I can't rat these people out because there's no one really to rat them out to. And I don't want to be known as that guy, but I also am not going to be on the take. I'm not going to be a dirty cop. And so I'm just stuck here as Detective Jim Gordon until this really creepy shadow guy pops up in my office.
In a very amazing scene, I love the dialogue in that thing where he goes, "You're just one man." And he goes, "No, now we're two." And it's such a great line of dialogue.
And then every cop show for the next decade copied the stapler gag.
Oh, of using the stapler as the gun?
Like I've seen it so many times, specifically on television since then.
All right, so the one part of this movie where we get super goofy is the ending of this movie and the microwave emitter. Although it is based on real technology, it is kind of goofy that Ra's al Ghul's plan is to just blow up all the water pipes in Gotham.
That's one of those moments where you kind of have to be like, comics.
Yes, you got So, Mark, I would love to hear your opinion. What do you feel rewatching this? How do you feel about the climax of this movie? It's a microwave emitter. All the people on the Narrows are seeing spooky bat creatures, and Batman lets Ra's al Ghul die. How do you feel about this climax of Batman Begins?
I feel like it's a good, because let's face it, the first time we saw it, we were all still recovering from the shock that Liam Neeson turned out to be Ra's al Ghul. And so we're just hanging on for dear life at that point. And if I was a prominent member in the League of Shadows, I don't know that poisoning the water supply is the worst idea. I mean, if you really want a city to fall, the water's a good place to start. And so I could go with it enough because at its heart, it's darker, it's different, it's subversive, but it is a comic book film. And so we have to have something to ramp up to, because as cool of a menacing presence as Scarecrow is and as great of a crime boss as Tom Wilkinson is, we do need something for Batman to truly show this city and the audience that, hey, I am here and I'm here to take care of things that nobody else can fathom.
Ashley, how do you feel about the confrontation, Ra's al Ghul, all the craziness on the Narrows? What do you feel about the climax of this movie?
I have very little issues with the final act of superhero movies being like convenient and quick to wrap everything, to like escalate the violence and then wrap everything up. With DC movies in particular, people like to criticize them for this. Wonder Woman gets a lot of criticism for this, whereas a lot of people like to hand wave away the fact that the MCU does the exact same thing. So I like the fact that they bothered to pick a smart, if maybe not wholly sound approach to this, because it fits with the way that we've introduced this character and how we know that Ra's operates. I love the symbolism of the train and what the train means throughout, and seeing how beautiful it is when Bruce is on it as a child versus when Rachel takes it and it's crappy later, and then they have their final confrontation on it. And as we know, all glory to Ra's al Ghul, he never dies.
All glory to Ra's al Ghul.
So
Sounds like you're joining the league right now.
For a Hypnotoad joke because we're watching Futurama.
Jason, if you need a place to crash tonight, you can come over to my
Mark,
place.
I need to come. I need a place of safety right now.
You can go cuddle with Molly.
I will bring you a blue lotus flower.
So for me, I was like, well, he's not dead. He'll be back. Just because familiarity with the character. But I think the actual confrontation itself is very cool, very, very powerful.
I agree. And I mean, the only the only part of it like I have any issue with is the part where Batman's like, well, I don't have to save you, or I'm not going to kill you, but I don't have to save you. But
I think that's Batman, though. I think
it is very Batman.
I don't think Batman would shoot you, but I think he'd drop you off of a 3-story building because he knows your legs will break.
Well, and we see that in The Dark Knight for Eric Roberts. Who deserved? No, I don't know. I don't know Eric Roberts. You're a very nice man, I guess. I don't know. Anyway,
he's Eric Roberts. I don't think Batman's losing any sleep over letting Ra's al Ghul die because it's like, dude, I'm still a guy here. I'm a guy under this armor. I can't do anything with that. And what a slippery slope it is from the cool comic book fantastical ending to just a ridiculous point of convenience, which is unfortunately what, in my opinion, The Dark Knight Rises devolved into, where we're driving all around and then we happen to plop down right underneath where we need to be, and that all felt way too convenient. This did not.
Yes. Now, I want to talk about a couple of things towards the end of this movie. One, I love the end scene with Rachel and Bruce and Alfred in the mansion, where it's like Bruce has finally come around to that great line of dialogue where he's like, oh, we're going to rebuild it brick by brick. And this was the first time in live action that this theory about Batman that had been set in the comic books for about 20 years that I believe was created by the late, great Denny O'Neil, the idea that Bruce is the mask and Batman is the real person. That once Bruce's parents were killed, Bruce Wayne ceased to exist and only Batman, or what would become Batman, existed from that point. First time in live action that had been said, and I think that's a genius and brilliant. And then Alfred gets to be cheeky about rebuilding, but we have to talk about the nice little setup to the sequel that they did not know was going to happen, but they had planned it, the Joker card.
I think it's genius.
It's straight out of a comic book, Frank Miller's Batman Year One, but you can find interviews way back in the past from about 2006, 2007 with interviews with David Goyer talking about, was the Joker card intentional? And he will always tell you that the Dark Knight trilogy and which of course wasn't called that at the time, he always saw it as the Joker was movie 2 and movie 3 was the trial of the Joker.
Oh, interesting.
AKA the creation of Two-Face. Mm-hmm. That was always, from Batman Begins, that was their loose idea of the trilogy. Mark, the Joker card. What do you feel about that being the end of the idea? And also, we talked about this movie being full of philosophy. This throws us another one where it brings up exactly what we see in the second movie, escalation.
Escalation, and the fact that Batman, look, if any of us, hell, after me guesting on your great show, I'll probably pat myself on the back for a job well done and relax. But when you're Batman, it doesn't matter what you just stopped, what crime you just foiled, who you just sent to Arkham. You can never rest. There's always somebody else coming. There's always another train that is rolling into Gotham that is to be feared. And with the Joker card, I mean, you talk about how Nolan set us up for this new era of comic book movies. That's not technically a post-credit scene, but it is something that teases us to get us talking as we're leaving the theater, not just about what a great movie it was, but hey, what's coming next? And horror movies had been doing that forever. Comic book movies, it was still relatively new for us to be teased in that fashion that was that cool and was that on the nose in the sense that we know who the villain that they're talking about is, but it was also mysterious enough for us to be like, what the hell does this Joker look like?
Mm-hmm. You make a really interesting point about horror movies doing that forever and ever, because how many times have we seen like Michael Myers' eyes open? It's the last shot.
Or Jason's mask is somewhere where it's not supposed to be.
I would have never pulled that.
That's great.
Expanded my mind.
Yes, and it's very easy for us, again, after like 11 years of the MCU, to just be like, oh yeah, end credit scene. They're just such the norm.
Yeah,
but they were not the norm. In fact, they didn't want to promote a sequel because they never knew if they were ever going to get it. Okay, so I want to do the super chat real quick, and then we're going to end this podcast the same way we end all our podcasts, by sort of over wrapping up the movie. So to everybody out there right now, we are, after we talk about the wrap up of the movie, we will take your questions, and as always, super chats jump to the top of the line. So if you definitely want to make sure that your question is answered on this podcast, then go for a super chat. Or don't, whatever you want to do.
Bring it on. Support my friends. We're here to talk Batman.
But we have a super chat here from Zach Jensen, but go ahead and fill the comments right now with questions and we will get to them in a minute. Zach Jensen says, love the movie, but this line always made me think that he did save him, referring to Batman. Justice is balance. You burned my house and left me for dead. Consider us even. Well, that is very true. Bruce does do the same thing. And Zach, you are smarter about writing than I am.
He does,
so
he does drop Roz off with a healer, though. Roz doesn't drop Bruce off at the hospital.
I think he's talking about the train. Because
interesting.
he's leaving, I think, Roz on the train the exact same way that Roz left him in a burning house.
Last night and be like, he left you with a doctor.
Yeah.
What are you so mad about?
Okay, so Mark, just like we ended all our movie retrospectives in Batman Begins, 2005's Batman Begins, who's the best actor?
Whew. It's hard for me not to say Bale just because he's the one that you're following through this odyssey, but Michael Caine is tough to go away from. I'm not going to say Katie Holmes because I'll never be invited back.
You can say whoever you want.
I think I'm going to go Christian Bale just to kind of because we've seen so many Bruce Waynes by that point and so many different incarnations of it. We got to see yet another side of Bruce Wayne, and we get to see just how passionate he was about his family and just how much that hurt him and just the depths that he sunk to. So getting to see the rise, then the fall, and then the redemption of Bruce Wayne, I think makes Christian Bale's performance the toughest one to pull off. But man, there is enough gravy to pass around to Liam Neeson and Tom Wilkinson and Morgan Freeman, Katie Holmes, yes, Michael Caine, Gary Oldman, everybody else in this movie. But I'll take Bale with my number one pick.
I'd love to see any of our listeners take some of the statements that Mark just said and make a fun piece of fan art called Batman Begravies. I would love to see that. I will happily send you a prize if you do this. So, Ashley, who do you think is the best actor in this movie?
It is really tough not to just go Christian Bale because he's doing a lot of literal and figurative heavy lifting throughout this. My favorite moment in the whole movie is when he just falls into that push-up and breaks his wrist. But I'm going to go with Michael Caine because he has the most subtlety that is asked of him. He's really playing a lot of complicated things just beneath the surface. And he's a performance that the older I get and the more I watch this movie, I appreciate more and more each time. So Jason, tell us why Katie Holmes is your choice.
Well, you see, when Katie Holmes says it's not what you say, it's what you do. You feel
it is a great line.
Really that David S. Goyer is carrying her through this movie with his typing. He is just saving her. I actually agree with you, Ashley. Yay. I think that Michael Caine really is the heart of this movie. And I agree with you. Christian Bale is an excellent. To be honest with you, most of the acting in this movie, I would say 98.9% of the acting in this movie is unbeatable gold. But Michael Caine, man, just shows that this is the reason why he is a respected veteran actor, because he just knows the right way to say certain words to just punch you in the heart and almost bring you to tears every single time. Mark, this movie was released in 2005. We are watching this in 2020, 15 years later. Does the movie hold up? And are there any parts of it that for you really be like, ooh, that's 2005?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head that doesn't hold up in this movie. I mean, the matriculation of Bruce becoming Batman, learning how to incorporate these different philosophies into what his new mantra is going to be. The light rail, I mean, a lot of it still feels a little ahead of its time, if anything. Getting to play with all this technology and a lot of that stuff still holds up. I'm sure there's probably an older flip phone that I missed upon rewatching it.
There's a Nokia something in there.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But other than that, I think that this movie does a great job of feeling timeless, of feeling like it's not just a time capsule movie, which I think Tim Burton's Batman even aimed to be that when it came out in 1989. I think it wanted to be a nostalgia kind of throwback to a simpler time, if you will. But this Batman, firmly entrenched in 2005, though it never felt like it was 2005 when it came out that year, and it still doesn't in 2020.
I agree with that. I think this movie does hold up, and I think you are correct. The one part of this movie I feel where it does give its age, and this is where all movies are going to show their age, is the CGI. Yeah. There are a couple of shots of the train where you're like, that's pretty cartoony.
Or when the tumbler jumps into the Narrows, you're like, that is 2005 CG. But it's good CG for the time.
Exactly. And the other thing about this is that I will say this, is that there are a lot of model shots in this movie. One of the shots, the outside shot of Ra's al Ghul's sort of temple in Nepal or China, wherever that's supposed to be, it looks real because it's a model shot. It's not a CGI shot, but it looks, even in 2020, looks legit real. Like, so for me, I think that's the only part of this movie where it shows its age is like sort of the CGI. I think it 100% holds up. I agree with you. There are many other comic book movies that I would say feel like they were made in 2005, whereas Batman Begins feel like it was made like last year. Ashley, you feel it holds up as well?
I do. The only thing besides the CG, which is just sort of inevitable with the way the industry goes, is like there's some casting choices where you're like, this was definitely like mid 2000s when this person was on an upswing or when this person was really, and that happens at all times. You could say that about a movie made in 1939. You know, like Christian Bale was super hot right then. That's why he got this movie. Katie Holmes, you know, that whole sort of zeitgeist. This is reflective of who was big in Hollywood at the time. And if this movie was being made now, it would have been two other actors. So that's okay.
All right. I will say though, it was coming off the tail end of that like Gap J. Crew. Let's wear our khakis loose kind of era. So there's more loose fitting clothes on the richest of the rich than you would see modern day. Modern day, it's a little more tailored, a little more James Bondy, if you will.
Yeah. So that's haircut is like mid 2000s as heck as well.
Oh yeah, haircut
with the layers. Yeah.
Great call.
All right, so Mark, rewatching this movie this week, Batman Begins. What do you think the message of this movie is? What do you think this movie is trying to say? And then overall, your final thoughts on Batman Begins.
Here we go. This movie is trying to say that as powerful as men or women can be, as individuals or even as collectives, that the most powerful force on earth to this day, 2005, 2020, doesn't matter when, is an idea. If you can be an idea that is connected and convinced that justice is the right way to go and how to best administer that justice, that if you can give somebody their comeuppance with a taste of vengeance, a little bit of revenge in your heart, but also allowing people to be forgiven for their mistakes, to serve their punishment, and then maybe be rehabilitated. Batman Begins gives us all of that, but above all else, it says that the symbol will live on forever. We're all made of flesh and bone, and we're all sadly going to perish one day, but the symbol, what we become, is much more than just this mortal coil. It can be an idea that can stand the test of time.
Oh, that's great.
Damn,
thank you. Good night.
Well, Ashley, let's see you follow that up.
I think this movie is saying, please give us a sequel. I think that's the message here. I think thematically, I don't know if I can say it better than what Mark said. And that is, in a lot of ways, an elevated version of the thesis of Batman and that great argument that is it Bruce or is it Batman? That's the real person underneath it all. But I also think on a meta standpoint, and I did make the joke about the sequel, that it's saying that we can take these icons from a medium that is considered silly at the time, and we can tell a real powerful emotional story with them. And that is something that has transcended. And that's why we have, like, as we've been saying, that's why we have all the TV shows and all the movies that we have now. So Jason, follow up on that.
Well, it's funny. Mark exactly nailed that. A lot of the basis of this movie is the idea argument. In fact, in our current atmosphere, that's the reason why a couple days ago, I shared like the words from this movie, the idea that you cannot stop an ideal. You can stop a man, but you cannot stop an ideal, because I felt that was very current and that could be used. I was hoping that would give some people some hope, you know, in terms of our current political situations and stuff like that, and all the you know, the demonstrations out there. I actually think, for me, I think this movie is summed up in the statement that Thomas says to Bruce when he's dying: "Don't be afraid," because this entire movie is a reaction to Bruce being so afraid and making his fear his life. Batman is his fear brought to life. And Batman is the idea that he is so afraid that if he loses anybody else, even anybody in Gotham City, that it'll be just as bad as it was when his parents died. And he's afraid of that. And you can see that because the entire movie, Alfred is like, "I got you, bud. I got you." And Batman's like, "No, you don't. I'm afraid." You know? So for me, that's what a lot of this movie is fear. And then that's the great thing about this trilogy as well, is each of the movies are sort of based around a sort of emotional basis. Like I really think this one is fear For me, the second one is very much chaos. Like, can you control chaos? And then the third movie, I think, is all based on, well, if you can fix your back, a broken back, you can fix anything. I don't know. Or actually, to be honest with you, I think the third one is more, some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
LOL.
Yeah. The third one is basically, hey kids, drink your milk because it's going to make your bones strong.
yeah. Some Asian martial artist will punch you in the back and it's all okay.
Totally.
All right. So everybody out there watching this live stream live, and if you're not listening to this live stream live, you're listening to this podcast later in the future. Hello, future people. Feel free. We're going to go through the comments right now, and we're going to answer some of these questions. And again, super chats will come to the front of the thing.
Can you guys kill a minute for me while I use the rest area so I can hang out and answer more questions?
Oh man, yeah, totally.
Sorry, I have fear that I'm going to pee my pants, and I'm going to go conquer that fear.
We'll go away. Mark is taking a quick break. We have our Carlito Classico. He says, anybody else get chills when the Joker says, "You and I are destined to do this forever," knowing sadly we were never going to see the Joker again. He's talking about the Dark Knight. I agree.
I don't know if I would say I get chills. When The Dark Knight came out, I read an article in the Globe and Mail, which is a big newspaper out of Toronto in Canada, and it had a picture of when Batman pulls the Joker over the interrogation table. And it was the first time that I'd ever heard the theory that the Joker and Batman are in love and that it's more of a romantic relationship than anything else. And then since then, I've gone and read a bunch of comics that have supported that. So that's the thing that I always take away from that Joker character, is like his relationship with Batman.
Yes, and I have to find that comment to hide it away. Here's a great question. Super Sonic Hero 10 said, Adam, what correlates this film to Shakespeare? I think we were talking about Force Awakens. I can't remember what we decided for Force Awakens, what Shakespeare plays Force Awakens was. But
this is so easy.
Is this Hamlet?
It's Hamlet, but I actually think Hamlet is the face value, right? Because it's the revenge story based around your parents.
And the prince coming back. But
Hamlet gets his comeuppance in a way that Batman can't, because Batman's going on to be our hero. So I would actually say this is a little more like Henry IV into Henry V, because in Henry IV, he's Prince Hal and he doesn't have any cares. And in Henry V, he figures out how to be the leader that England needs. And he leads people through the Battle of Agincourt and gains the respect of his country. And Batman, over the course of this movie, Bruce learns how to become Batman, and then he leads Gotham through a period of strife to becoming their hero.
Mark, we know you're a huge fan of Shakespeare. And I've been told through the Schmodown that you have been pushing for a Shakespeare Schmodown, you versus Ashley. Which Shakespearean play do you feel is the most like Batman Begins?
To quote Robin Williams' Shakespeare, the moon, like a testicle, hangs low in the sky. I feel like this is great Shakespearean as far as the film goes, because Shakespeare is just littered with daddy issues. And whether you want to go Lion King or you want to go Star Wars or this, it's not just about missing the father or the absence of a parent. It's also living up to the legacy that they created for themselves. And how do you follow that? How do you follow in those footsteps? And eventually, if you try hard enough, maybe you'll find your own footing and your own path to go down. So it is a very Shakespearean kind of thing. But I mean, that's why Shakespeare or maybe Ben Jonson, I don't know, whoever actually wrote those things, was so ahead of their time and so pervasive in the culture even today, is because that still rings true for all of us, is that we're trying to figure out how do we follow in our parents' footsteps.
Here's another question from Zach Jensen. What is your thought on when Batman uses the device to summon bats for his escape? Mark, what do you feel about this?
He's conquered his fear, folks. And it's not necessarily that he conquered his fear. This movie isn't about the absence of fear. It's about being brave and being able to control your fear. So in the same way that Scarecrow is trying to manipulate his victims, Batman is trying to manipulate his fear into a weapon to instill fear in others and not just himself. So if he is afraid of bats, imagine what it's going to do to everybody else. So I love that bats are aiding in his escape. It's a great scene.
I love this because this is Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer tipping the hat to Frank Miller's Batman Year One, where there is a scene where Batman is trapped in a basement and he activates a sonic device and all the bats come in and rescue him. So I was like, this is Christopher Nolan is very good about that. Actually, in all three movies, In The Dark Knight, there's a scene between Harvey Dent and Christopher Gordon. Commissioner Gordon.
James Gordon.
Yeah, James Gordon and Batman on the rooftop.
We do have a geek history lesson on. I know what I taught it.
Yes, and that is literally a scene ripped out of Batman: The Long Halloween. Mm-hmm. So I love Christopher Nolan pulls from. And a lot of The Dark Knight Rises is pulled from Batman No Man's Land, which is also an awesome, super cool story as well. This is a great question that no one brought up.
I brought this up. I brought that he grew up to be killed by Westerosi.
Yep. Oh, that's correct. Adam Grunther says, is it funny to see young Joffrey now? Yes, it is. It is very weird.
It's also wild to me that they cast an English child instead of they were like, there's no American child actors that are worthy of playing James Gordon Jr.
You want to know why?
Because they shot a bunch of it in England.
They shot everything of the Narrows. Yeah. They shot at Pinewood Studios outside of London. That is the reason why Joffrey's in this movie.
Also, I'm sorry, I don't know his name off the top of my head. He is a wonderful actor, even in this movie, because kid actors are tough to come by. And he doesn't have a lot to do in this movie, but he's great. So.
No, just sound American, which is the same thing that Gary Oldman was doing, the same thing that Christian Bale was doing. So it was a running theme throughout Batman Begins, is that Brits are just better than us.
Jack Gleason is the actor who plays Joffrey Baratheon, and young scared kid who gets apparently a $5 million piece of radar technology from Batman.
Yeah.
I can't believe Bruce is like, yeah, here you go. Here's a great question, and I want to talk about this. Lee Carter said, what are your thoughts on the Batman suits and their advancements through this trilogy, the Christopher Nolan trilogy? Mark, how do you feel about it's basically the same suit in Dark Knight Rises, but this is a much different suit from the one he gets in Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, it's a very stripped down version, and it's like any great athlete. You look at Michael Jordan, who would just keep adding new elements to his game every summer, and that's exactly what Batman was doing. Is that you go out, you fight crime, some baddie comes a knocking, and you take care of him, you turn him into the police or the asylum or whatever you do, and then you realize, oh, okay, I'm not perfect. Like Batman was never so cocky that he couldn't improve, that he couldn't refine, and you even see that in this movie where they're ordering parts and they realize, oh, okay, we got to get the really good stuff because this is going to shatter. And so he's just constantly tweaking what is in his repertoire or his bat belt.
Ashley, I don't know your thoughts on this. What do you feel about the suits of the Dark Knight trilogy?
I think this first one really looks like the Michael Keaton suit, and it's because of the headpiece. Mm-hmm. And even though I don't think it is a strong aesthetically, I appreciate in the next movie when he wants to turn his head and they just give him the bike helmet. And I do think if you were trying to be Batman, that's a better choice instead of having to wing yourself around. But I mean, I think the suit looks good through. I think every bat suit from this point on so far, knock on wood, looks really good. And I think they learned from some of the steep curves of the past as well. I just want to say, we were talking about English actors. When Bruce finally comes back to Wayne Enterprises, the secretary who he's hitting on when they're playing golf, that's an actress named Christine Adams. Christine Adams is currently playing Lynn Stewart in the Black Lightning television show. So she has a little DC history there. Nice. How do you feel about the Batsuits, Jason?
The Batman Begins Batsuit is my favorite Batsuit. Hands down. Now, I fully admit that I think the Ben Affleck one, like it walked out of the comic books, is amazing.
It's got Fat Bat on it.
But I think that the Dark Knight and the Dark Knight Rises suits are over-designed. I understand that, I could see what Christopher Nolan was going for. He was like, I'm going full function and I want to see it. And I like that this looks like the Michael Keaton suits because it's like the Michael Keaton suits, but it's like with our technology, because if you notice, the cowl is more fitted. It's not because the Michael Keaton cowl was like just straight rectangles of Batman ears. Like he didn't look like a human. He looked like a walking marshmallow that was cut with a fork. This is curved to his head. Also, the ears are curved, and it fits around his eyes better than and then also his chest symbol has my favorite Batman chest symbol of all time. It's the Jim Lee comic book symbol that they were using currently in the comic books, unlike the squared off Batman, sort of Christopher Nolan design of one. And I also love that currently in his live stream, Mark Ellis's TV has come to life and was playing different parts of the trailer. I love it.
That's confused. That's confused Bruce. That's him lying, saying anybody that dresses like a bat has serious issues. It's you've thrown up off the scent.
That scene is really fun. I like that scene a lot.
All right, so I think that is all we can say about Batman Begins. I think we just put this thing to bed. Ashley, if they go over to geekhistoryLesson.com/recommended reading, do you know what they'll find over there if they want to learn more about Batman Begins?
Yes, if you go over to geekhistoryLesson.com/recommended reading, you'll find everything that we've recommended in this episode, which means you'll find the Blu-ray version of Batman Begins.
Probably Batman Year One.
Of the trilogy, Batman Year One. And if I can find a copy of the screenplay that you can check out if you want to learn more about this or anything that is associated with this movie, pick them up, take some money out of Jeff Bezos' pocket and put it in ours so that we can continue to build our ugly, ugly Batmobile.
That is correct. And don't forget, guys, that you can download and listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. If there is a website out there that will play a podcast, I guarantee you the Geek History Lesson is on it. In fact, even the weird podcast sites. I guarantee you we're on the weird podcast sites. I want to thank our very special guest here,
Henri Ducard.
Mr. Henry Ducard, also known as Mr. Mark Ellis. Can you please let our fans know and listeners know where they can find you? If you have any, do you have any online shows coming up? Anything interesting that we can check out, peep out, watch?
Hopefully I'm back to live stand-up soon, and we'll see what the regulations and restrictions are. But in the meantime, speaking of Jeff Bezos and his wonderful company, Amazon, you can catch my special dog, Stepfather. That's the dog. I'm the Stepfather on Amazon Prime right now. And Geek History Lesson, yes, you can get it at all your conventional podcast places, but it's the only podcast also available on the dark web. Hey, it makes sense given our subject matter today.
That is correct. I have been told it is on the dark web. In fact, the dark web has emailed me and threatened me to take it off of there. And I said, no. I said, what are you going to do? Steal my grandmother's bank account? And they did. Okay. You can follow.
That's a whole other show.
Yeah. That was an interesting episode of Geek History Lesson, that one. All right. So you can follow Miss Ashley Robinson on Twitter and Instagram at where, Ashley?
Ashley V. Robinson. The V is very important.
Yes. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Jawin. That's Jawiin. We also have a Patreon that can also support the podcast, patreon.com/Jawin. And I gotta say, we plan Batman Begins at the end of the Gladiator episode. Mm-hmm. So I mean, Mark, if you're in on this, I would love just every couple of months we pick some movie that was made 20, 15, 5 years ago and just do it and bring you on and talk about it. I don't know.
Something hard next time. Like at least Gladiator I had to rewatch.
We're doing Arrietty. You want to come do some Studio Ghibli with us?
Arrietty.
Yeah.
Oh boy. I think I might be going to the dentist that week. I don't know that I can catch up with that.
Well, I'll tell you what.
We'll find something.
Okay, I will throw this out there. I will not throw this out there as a fan campaign because I know Ashley is not for this. But
oh no.
10 years ago, a little movie came out with a very subtle title. Very subtle. It was called Kick-Ass.
I don't want to do Kick-Ass.
Ashley does not want to do it. I don't know what Mark's feelings are on Kick-Ass.
Hey man, I will call you Big Daddy, and I'll call Ashley Hit Girl all day long. Let's do this.
All right, so maybe
GHL #GHL Kick-Ass. Yeah.
#Kick-Ass.
Or
yes.
no. You can also do no.
Okay, but I think it's only fair. Though, if the fans go for Kick-Ass and go #Kick-Ass. Yes, I think me and Mark have to also talk about a movie that maybe we're not so hot on, but Ashley is very hot. Okay. I think that is only fair if we end up. So
all right.
If we do Kick-Ass and everybody goes for Kick-Ass, then the next movie is 100%. We cannot veto it.
Okay.
All right. I think that's only fair. Mark, are you down for this?
Yeah, but look at that devious smile that Ashley has. She already knows what movie she's going to pick, and it's going to torture us, and she's not going to reveal her answer.
About baby, that 3-hour-long musical epic.
Well, the only caveat I will make is you obviously cannot make it Arrietty because Mark is already.
That's fine. That's one of the. We have a couple other ones.
We already know whatever date we pick for Arrietty.
Yeah.
Mark has a dentist appointment.
That's fine.
So.
maybe we get
just get these.
Though.
Yeah.
Maybe Molly will come and join us for Arrietty. We'll see.
All right. All right, everybody out there. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Geek History Lesson. I am Jason, sometimes in front of a blue background. Inman.
I am Ashley Victoria Robinson.
Mark Ellis, thank you again for joining us.
Hey, missed you all. Appreciate you guys. Can't wait to hang out in person. And if you're in front of a blue wall, I'm in front of a sleeping puppy, and that's just the way I like it.
Awesome. All right. And we definitely saw how Batman begun. So, Ashley, could you please dismiss and close out this podcast?
Class is now dismissed.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Oh, yeah.